Starting a podcast is hard. No one tells you how many moving parts there are until you're knee-deep in edits, scheduling, and trying to figure out what on earth an RSS feed actually is. Seriously, from tech issues to awkward silences in interviews, we've faced it all. But here's the thing. We wouldn't trade it for anything. This season was a journey. There were moments that we thought, can we really keep this going? And then the next episode would drop and your feedback will remind us why we started. This is our podcast, Flourishing, Unfiltered. The podcast for high achievers who seek a professional life that feels as good as it looks, where we interview business owners and industry leaders, hearing their challenges on the path to success. Today, we take you behind the scenes of our podcast and share what we've learnt from season 1. Let's get started. Maike, how are we going today? Season 1, it's a wrap.
How exciting is that? But also, I'm a little bit terrified about what we're going to discuss today because I just have absolutely no clue.
Yeah, I know. I'm going well, thank you. And yeah, I'm feeling a little bit the same. It's a bit of a loose schedule, I would say, that we've got here. But that's kind of the point of the show, really. We spoke off air about this. We didn't want this to be too rigid or too structured. We had some ideas, but there's definitely no script here today. There's nothing that we're going off other than our own ideas and intuition that develops as the conversation develops, I guess. But
exactly.
Maybe it's great.
And we did, yeah.
No, you go.
No, I just wanted to say, I did say the other day, it's so easy. We say we want these conversations to be raw and vulnerable and talk about the struggles. And then at some stage I thought, hang on a minute, we're interviewing all these fabulously successful people. Of course, in hindsight, it's easy maybe to talk about the struggles. I mean, I don't want to overgeneralize this. Surely there's still, some struggling there in the sharing, even in hindsight. And then also some of our guests I know are not, they certainly don't feel like they've come out of the other end and are super successful now. But I did say to you, didn't I? We need to think about how we can bring a little bit more rawness and vulnerability into this and maybe interview people who have not come out on the other side yet. And I guess who's better to interview than ourselves with this podcast, right?
Absolutely. And actually, I was thinking, I'm like, what's the first question I want to ask Maike? And I was actually going to ask, how did we land on this episode? And you've just, you've answered the question there before I even got a chance to ask it. But yeah, we really wanted to give people a little bit of the raw behind the scenes of our journey and what we've experienced. And I don't think we feel as though we've made it yet. I'm sure that the conversation will bring out some interesting talking points that we thought, maybe we're a bit further along, or maybe something landed better than what we expected. But we still very much consider ourselves on the journey at the moment.
Or even totally in the beginning still, right?
Oh,
That's how I feel.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to think that we're just starting out.
Even though it's a wrap on season 1. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And even though it's a wrap on season 1, I absolutely feel as though we're just starting out. And it's so true. I mean, basically, this whole idea for this episode was sparked the other day because we had scheduled a meeting, just the two of us, right? Just to debrief. What have we learned? What are we happy with? What do we feel like needs to change for season 2? Because maybe I don't know whether this is still a secret, but we've started, recording for season 2 already. So what needs to change and so forth. So, and we just ended up having this big conversation around all the things we are clueless about. And we don't really know which way to take it. Do we try and make this a really big show? Do we invest a lot of money into it? It's hard to invest in any endeavor, any business endeavor, when you don't know whether it's going to be successful by any means. And then define success. Like, what are we even hoping for? It's so confusing, isn't it?
Yeah, and like I said in the intro, there's so many moving parts, right? There were so many factors involved in making the show what it is, and now trying to determine how it evolves into its next iteration and what that looks like has been a really interesting point for us. But I wonder if it's worthwhile almost even going back to the start, because I know that we both had this ambitious idea that we could start a podcast that just started from a conversation between the two of us. And I don't think that we actually knew what was involved. I think
No.
to a degree, there was this idea that, and I think some people still have this idea about podcasts, that you sit down, you press record, and then you upload, and that's it.
Yeah.
Don't think
Yeah.
we've come to realize it's so far from that. Maybe did you want to help our listeners out and maybe give them a bit of a rundown? Like, what the heck's involved in making a podcast?
Yeah, well, I guess though it depends a little bit on what you're trying to achieve with a podcast. And like for us, we just had the ambition or the expectation we wanted to have our own social media. So we have our Instagram platform dedicated to the podcast. We wanted to have a dedicated website for it. We wanted to include video recordings and have them edited and look really nice. So, and then post them onto YouTube. So I guess that adds a lot more expense and time and just resource on so many levels that we had to invest in it. So I don't know. I'm just wondering right now, is it possible to have a podcast where you just press record and that's it? And maybe, and also it's the two of us running this thing and we interview guests. So that adds more complexity yet again. To some extent, it's really nice because we can work share, and we've said a couple of times how nicely our skills complement one another. But, we have to discuss everything. We have to agree on everything. We have to schedule in appointments. And if one of us is sick or, something goes on in life, we just have to reschedule everything, and with the guests as well. So it's just so much complexity there, isn't it? So I do wonder whether it's possible to have a podcast where you just sit down and press record.
Oh, it'd be amazing if you could. I mean, if it can be done that way,
Don't ditch me now.
We need to find out. No, you're
I
right.
want that life.
Yeah. But yeah, right. So much more complex, and maybe some of the decisions that we've made in how we wanted the podcast to look has influenced and maybe increased some of the complexities as well. Like you said. It's an interview type podcast, so obviously that adds an extra layer and working around other people and their different time zones, because it's not as if we're all just like recording from guests in one location that match our time zone, which differs from time to time throughout the year. Not a great deal, thankfully, but for many of our guests, we would be up early hours of the morning to match their afternoon or their evening, and then all of the other bits and pieces too. Right, like editing the videos, doing shorts, creating artwork. The show notes were just, I know that there's massive amount of work that goes into the show notes. And like you said, there's some complementing strengths. And I think we've mentioned this a couple of times, right, that we've got complementing strengths. And I think I've maybe alluded to the fact that I am not really in charge of many of the show notes, but we haven't probably gone into too much depth around what our strengths are and what we bring to the show. I don't know if that's something that you feel as though is worthwhile unpacking a little bit here.
Well, I don't even know what to say because, for example, sure, I do the show notes, but I wouldn't say that's my strength at all. In fact, I don't like doing it even. But, I can do it and I can do it relatively quickly, I guess. But I don't know exactly even what I bring to the show. I guess maybe an ability to reach out to people, or maybe the concept of the show in the beginning, and I guess perhaps a natural tendency to connect deeply with people. It certainly is one of my highest values in life, and is also one of my biggest strengths. Maybe I shouldn't say this, but a friend of mine said the other day, yes, because you flirt with everyone. It's like, okay, that sounded a bit strange. Like, I don't want anyone to think that I'm just going around flirting with everyone. And I said, but I flirt with women too. She said, yeah, that's what I mean. You literally flirt with everyone. But for me, it's not flirting. For me, it's like dancing. There's no point for me in connecting with someone if we don't have a little dance, if I can't poke and actually feel where they're at, what hurts them, what excites them. I want to know what's going on for them. So deep connection, I love that. But anyway, I didn't want to digress there too much. What do you think? I know many of the strengths you bring to the show, but what would you say you bring?
Well, what I thought might have actually, as I asked that question, I was like, oh, maybe what would have been nicer was to ask each other what we think we bring to the show. Because for you, to respond to what you said, I would say that you are a very charismatic person. I think that you definitely have an ability to deeply connect with our guests, both pre-show in reaching out to them and making them feel comfortable about the space that they're coming into. And this is an element of our coaching practice too, where we need to very quickly establish relationships. And often we're doing that 10 minutes before we press record with the guests. Quick intros, talking through the structure of the show, and then we get into it. And we want them to feel as though the space that they're in is one in which they can share some really vulnerable stories. And I think that you do that exceptionally well. So I'm going to give you a little bit of kudos
Thank
there.
you.
Feeling as though that is something that you definitely bring to the show. I think also the concept of the show, in fairness, very much originated from your thoughts. And I guess maybe even the questions, or actually not even guess, the questions that we asked throughout the show were generated from you. And then, we've sort of had a bit of creative license to take them in the direction that we want for each episode. But the original intent of what we were trying to ask and what we were trying to find was an idea that was sparked from your end. So for our listeners, there's hopefully
so
some good
nice.
insights there.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Well, then maybe to throw that ball back into your court. No, it's in my court, isn't it? I would say that what you bring, and I guess that's the part of what you bring to the show and what you bring to the guests, but also the part of what you bring as a co-host. And for me, I guess, I don't know if our listeners know whether we've mentioned this before, but we only met a few months ago, right? And we met and we, for some other reason, and both mentioned the idea of maybe doing this podcast and so forth. And we said, well, and so that's when I bounced this idea I had of this show and said, well, how would you feel about doing it together? And we both said, all right, why don't we meet for an hour per week for the next 3 weeks and see what we can come up with? And if we feel like we've got something that we can make work, then let's just run with it. And I remember, I think it was like literally the second or the third meeting where we'd created so much in the meantime already that we said, and we were at the point where the next step was to send out email invites to potential guests, right? And I was like, okay, hang on a minute. We can't send out email invites without us now fully committing. And then we committed. And I just think, and it just went from there. And there was not one moment where I felt as though I couldn't rely on you, and never did anything ever fall apart. You were always like, your level of commitment and reliability, I think are so hard to find these days in the world. So to me, that means a lot. I value that so highly. And I think what you bring, well, both as a co-host, but also to our guests, and I feel like every guest feels this and comments on that after the recording stops, is your level of, I don't even know what to call it. I don't know. You've got this very strong presence of integrity and humility and trust. It's very grounding and it's very beautiful. And again, I feel like it's hard to come by. And it's just fantastic. I appreciate that.
It's very, very kind. I mean,
maybe
I feel
I should
I could also
mention
say the same thing to you, but
hang on a minute. I haven't mentioned everything you actually do with managing all our videos and stuff like that. Oh my God, the amount of work you do. Far out. Okay. We need another half-hour recording to get through all of that. I know you put a lot of work into it and you're so busy. I don't know whether I should comment on all the things you do and have got going on in your life. I don't think it's my place to comment on that, but it's incredible. I don't know how you find the time or make the time. And I know you've lost a lot of sleep over it too.
But I would say I don't know if it's strength or mine, but I definitely tend to do it well. I think I might at times drive you nuts with my line of questioning and critiquing. I would say that I'm very, when we come up with something, I have a particular vision for it, and I like things to look and be presented in a certain way. And I know at times that can be challenging to work with, but I'd say that you're fairly receptive to ideas, which I really love as well. It does make working with you really easy.
Yeah, you've got a nice high level of standard, but not one that's not, that I'm not able to work with or work towards. So it's actually really, really nice.
Yeah, and
but
I would also say,
I just say, yeah.
Okay, I was just going to say one last thing too. I would say your level of commitment to the podcast has been unwavering as well. There's not at all once been a time when I've looked to go find something and I can't find it. Or I tell you what, our listeners need to know that Maike has the most amazing file structure and folder structure in our shared Google Drive,
ADHD brain.
which
I need
works
it.
with my works with my OCD. So I
Yeah.
think that we were the right people to at least work on this show together for sure. Sorry, I interrupted.
So glad all my folders, and can we just mention my table of contents with all the links that go like
It's
directly
amazing.
into the
It's
part
amazing.
of the. Anyway, okay, not here to toot my horn. Okay, but can I ask you? Can I go over to the next part and just go? How about we ask each other, or I would love to ask you the same questions we usually ask our guests, and I would love to ask you what you've struggled with or what you're struggling with when it comes to our podcast.
Yeah, this is a big question. And it's always interesting when we sort of ask this one throughout the show. It's interesting to sort of see which way it goes. I think for me, and you kind of alluded to it just a moment ago, is around the time and managing the other commitments that are happening outside. We both work full time. I'm studying and I've got a young family as well, which are all very time consuming. And then when you're trying to fit in things like a little bit of self-care, an exercise routine, I've got a lot of travel as well at the moment. That's probably a bit of a challenging one for me. That would be the biggest one. And I'm wondering if you could ask the follow-up to that as to how I navigate that. Is that what you'd like to know next?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Well, it actually links so nicely to one of the conversations, actually our last conversation that was had in the show with Shona, where she was talking about time blocking and utilizing time blocking technique. And for our listeners, if you haven't listened to that ep, Shona's an incredibly busy human being, juggling multiple commitments, very similar to mine actually, but just doing it on a much bigger level. And hearing the way that she really dedicates herself to small activities and has very intentional time, something that I really like and I aspire to do a little bit better. But that is how I managed to fit it in.
So then if we just go with the flow, what lessons have you learned? And it doesn't have to just pertain to your particular struggle, I guess, maybe just in general, but also can pertain to that.
Yeah, well, if I was looking at my particular struggle in managing time, it's just been a matter of going, all right, this is when I can set a time for this intentionally to get these sort of tasks done, and being quite disciplined with my approach. I use Pomodoro technique very regularly, where I have a very intentional set of time for work, and then I'll have a little bit of downtime. Try and keep it pretty minimal, and it doesn't include using my phone, because I know that as soon as I use my phone, that Pomodoro's out. I find it so hard to re-engage for the next 45 minutes. So it might be just taking the moment to just enjoy the sun. Might be taking a moment to just step away, relax, and make a nice coffee. So that would be a lesson for me in going, this really needs to be, you need to be quite disciplined with your time here. That's not to say that I don't have time for fun and I don't have time for the things that I enjoy. It's maybe just been a little bit more structured with it, and the need for that in peak times.
Yeah, you've been incredibly busy. And is that also a piece of advice, or would you, turn this into a bit of a different piece of advice for our listeners?
I guess the advice would be just to first determine what's most important to you, right? Think about, what serves you well and what brings you energy, and make sure that you have time for that in your day. I try and make sure that in every one of my days, regardless of how busy I am, there's some time for something that serves me well and brings me joy and energizes me. And sometimes the podcast is this, and then sometimes the podcast is not that, depending on what the task is that needs to be done. But that's a reality. But the reality is, I would say I love 90% of what we do in the podcast. There are some things that I'm just like, I don't have as much energy for, and doesn't bring me as much energy. When you're reviewing the third or fourth edit of an hour-long video, and you're just like, I need to just get through this. Whereas on the flip side, creating like artwork or trying to find the best quote that comes from from an episode, and critically thinking, what are our listeners going to be most interested in? I really enjoy that. Yeah, so that would maybe be my
sounds really good. That sounds really good. And now I'm terrified that you're going to ask me the same questions, because that would only be fair.
Absolutely.
But I don't know that I have something so concrete, so concrete to talk through. And even thoughts, I feel like in my head, it's all just questions and struggles and chaos at the moment.
Yeah.
Maybe as background information, I am not employed. So in terms of fitting the podcast in, and we've had this throughout the whole season, I am a lot more flexible than you are. And usually it's like when we have to fit in appointments and open the calendar for our guests, it's usually going by your calendar, and then I try to work around that. So for me, that's a lot simpler. So I didn't, and also I don't have a baby at home, that keeps me up at night and like struggling, with sleep deprivation and stuff like that. So I don't have any of those struggles. For me, I don't know. I don't know if there was something I really struggled with throughout this whole season recording. I don't think so, because we just had such a good flow. And again, it's like that commitment, reliability. I felt as though it was all just little things that we were able to fix very quickly. For me, the biggest struggle is right now is understanding, okay, so we've recorded a whole season. Where are we at with this? What are we hoping this to be? Is it received well? I mean, we can look at our downloads and we go, yeah, I guess that's not bad. But what do people take away from it, and even, we just spoke about this before. If I ask through my Instagram, I ask my audience there, are there any particular guests you'd like to come onto the show? It's usually crickets, other than, some people proposing themselves to come onto the show to be interviewed. I don't know exactly where to go from here. And this is my biggest struggle. I don't know whether I'm trying to turn this into the next big podcast and we just need to invest really well to somehow get us into a location where we can both be in a fancy studio with a whole camera team and have our guests fly in, which is really hard because we live in Australia, no one else does. And then even, if we were, let's say, in the States somewhere, our guests are from around the world. And that's one of the expectations we also have. And one of the ambitions that we're hoping for a more diverse audience or a global audience. Diversity, we already spoke about this in private, that we're still absolutely struggling with that. We're hoping to bring more diversity onto the show. And also that is really hard for me anyway. Or do we just say, no, let's not make it all the bells and whistles and play the same game that everybody else does by making these shows look just so amazing. What really matters is the content, and let's just focus on making the content better. So I don't really know where to go from here with all of that, what to think of that, what to make of it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot in that, and these are the questions that we've been having, or the conversations that we have been having off air around where to next. And, we've spoken about, if there was an endless pool of cash, what would the podcast look like? And, it's almost like what's utopia and then what's protopia, the in between where we are now and where we would love to be. And yeah, it's going to be interesting, and it's going to be exciting to see what future iterations look like. And as you mentioned, season 2's already starting to come together, and we've got some ideas as to how that's going to look and the guests and things like that as well. But I think it's good,
and it's
in the sense that I was just going to say, I think it's good in the sense that it challenges us, right? It's something that we care about, and we want it to serve our listeners. So this is why we care so much about it. But it does present some challenges for us too.
Exactly. And it's also things like, of course, we look at some of our data and try to make sense of that, but then it's really hard because it is still so early days. And then, if you have a small sample size or just only a little bit of data to try and find patterns, it's like when you've just launched, of course, you've got like lots of views right in the beginning because people want to kind of check it out. Like, try to find patterns in data when you don't have a lot of data can be a bit challenging or misleading at times as well. So, or the whole idea of, well, do we really need the whole YouTube side of things? Do we need the videos? Can we just ditch all the video edits to save some time and resources, those kinds of things? And that is really hard. And I feel like for me, in terms of, how I navigate that, is just, I guess, our conversations and trying to keep a bigger vision to some extent. Well, what does this podcast mean to me in the bigger picture? And again, what is our actual mission? At the end of the day, if our mission is to share the struggles behind the scenes, with other people who are just sort of starting out, I feel like, well, we are offering conversations that kind of deliver that. We're not really putting any resources into marketing or anything like that other than our time. So we don't do, paid ads or anything like that for people to have a bigger chance of finding us, I guess. Or we don't, try to get on top of the algorithms to try and make this bigger. So people would have to really look in order to find us. But in terms of the core idea and the core mission, we're just doing that. And I almost feel like, well, maybe we just, until we have a better answer or a better insight, maybe we just keep doing this the way we have so far, at least for season 2 as well, and then see where we're at.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's where my thinking is at.
I think that's kind of where we're at the moment, really. That's our current reality. And it's interesting, and I'm sure that you would have the same on your end. I know that in sharing conversations with friends and colleagues, and even some of the people from uni, which I'm studying with, they love the show. Even some of my coaching clients, they love the show. They're interested in, the advice that's given. They're interested in the stories that people have got to tell. So I'd say it is serving the population well in that sense. And one of the things that I really aspire to have come from the show is people being more exposed to the tools and tips that can help them live a more fulfilling life. I really love that. There's so many great angles and insights from different, some people that I find very inspirational. So yeah, there's a lot still for us to ponder and a lot for us to work out as far as where to next and how do we grow and expand.
Absolutely.
It's exciting.
And I just yeah, it is exciting. I know. And I'm so grateful for this. And maybe just to also put it into context, obviously the podcast is not everything we're doing. It's same for most podcasters, I'm guessing. There's just so many things to juggle and you just have to select so carefully. Is it worth your time and energy, and that's just the biggest juggle, I guess. But maybe at this stage might be a good point to also say to our listeners, if there's any kind of feedback you have for us, I mean, obviously we'd love a 5-star review as well on all the platforms. But most importantly, if there are guests you are hoping to come on the show for us to interview, please let us know. You can always either drop a comment on YouTube, send us a DM on Instagram at Flourishing Unfiltered, send us an email to flourishingunfiltered@gmail.com. Please just get in touch and let us know what you're hoping for, or if there's a question you feel like is missing in every single episode, or any kind of feedback and future direction would be so highly appreciated.
Absolutely. And that is such a great point. And also worth noting and saying thank you to our listeners that have left us reviews and comments as well, and feedback on any of our posts, whether it be on LinkedIn or Instagram. One of us generally reads through them the same day that they're posted. I would say you do it a bit quicker than what I do, Maike. You're pretty quick when it comes to the socials. But we do, we take on board the feedback that's there, and we love the cheers of support that we've received throughout the season. So that's a pretty big one.
And a big thank you to all the downloads and listens and all the encouraging feedback. That's been beautiful. Obviously, again, without the listeners, there's no point in having this show. So that's absolutely amazing. And I also want to say a big thank you to our sponsors. I mean, Claire Goodridge, the future of Flourishing, so amazing, so much trust. We are so grateful for the future of Flourishing to have been the sponsor of our show of season 1. I mean, who has a sponsor on the first, unless you're a celebrity, for the first season of your podcast. The leap of faith Claire's taken with us, so amazing. We're so grateful for it. And the future of Flourishing is absolutely amazing. Membership-based business to support new leaders, new coaches, new entrepreneurs, solopreneurs on their journey to ensure they've got the community and the education and the resources they need in order to thrive. Absolutely love what Claire does with the future of Flourishing. And then also positivepsychology.com. I mean, hello, favorite blog in the world. And I couldn't be more proud and more grateful for them to have supported us as well, especially by sponsoring the season final episode, as well as, you know, shout outs and newsletters in their stories on Instagram and so forth. They've been absolutely amazing. And yeah, I'm so appreciative of this. So thank you.
The support has been absolutely amazing. And for our listeners, if you haven't listened to Claire's episode, we actually interviewed Claire earlier in the season. So if you want to hear from the founder of the Future of Flourishing, who has sponsored this season, worthwhile going back and learning a little bit about her journey and her struggles, but also the community that she's built, because that was a big part of the conversations that we had with Claire around the fact that no one flourishes alone. So some beautiful messages captured in that episode, but also amazing to have positivepsychology.com on as well. Perhaps reflecting
and by the way,
on...
we also interviewed Zeph, the founder, the founder or co-founder of positivepsychology.com, who's obviously not on board anymore with them, sold it off, but also interviewed him, and also that was a great conversation.
Very raw and authentic conversation from Seth, with some very interesting insights that, you know, I don't think many people get a chance to sort of really hear about, you know, that level of struggle that has gone on behind the scenes. And Seth's had some really interesting insights. Comes from a completely different sort of angle from a business perspective, and what he brought to positivepsychology.com. So definitely worth a listen as well. In reflecting on season one, Maike, and thinking about our guests and the people that we interviewed, was there like a favorite quote or a favorite lesson that you had from any one of our guests? I mean, obviously we could say that all of the episodes are amazing. Everyone should listen to them, which they should. But was there something that really resonated with you? Because different things resonate with different people.
I feel like you're asking me about my favorite child, and I don't really want to do that. And I'm not sure if I can. I feel like every guest brought such a unique perspective. I don't know if there's something that really stood out to me, because it was all so different. What about you? Can I just bounce this back to you? Did you have some favorite insights or quotes or tools shared?
Well, there was a quote, and I think that there's maybe a little bit of bias here as a Richmond supporter in the AFL. I loved our episode with Trent Cotchin, and the quote that he had there, you know, when you lose yourself in the service of others is when you truly find yourself. And I'm a big believer in the fact that every person has unique gifts and talents, and if we can find a way to unleash them and have them, you know, delivered back out to other people, that's really, really special. And I kind of feel as though that's what we've done with the podcast, and I found it really affirming. But Trent has a beautiful way of articulating, you know, comes from a sports background, but now started a business and is really living out that notion of, you know, serving other people and quite authentically too. So I mean, all of the episodes were brilliant. And like I said, there's maybe a little bit of bias that sits in that decision, but I found that to be really affirming for the work we're doing. And particularly because Trent was one of our early recordings as well, which, by the way, good for our listeners to know, we were really panicked about, because at that point, Trent was the biggest name that we had coming on the show. And we were sending out invites, and we're sending out a calendar where people can just pick a date that works. And Trent's picked quite an early one, and we're like, oh, crap, are we even going to know how to be like hosts at that point?
I know. And do you remember what happened on that day? I had just moved back to Brisbane because literally when we both met, I was in Australia on a holiday thinking I'm actually now moving to Europe. I was a digital nomad at the time. And then we spontaneously decided to move back to Brisbane. And so I was just literally had just moved here, and I had school interviews for my boys. And we were at the school interviews, and obviously that's very important, and you can't just leave. And it just went a little bit over time, and I had to race back. Now, at that time, on that day, they put new carpets into our place here, and I couldn't even be in our apartment. So the management of the building put me into the private dining room on the rooftop, and I'm sitting there. I literally ran back from school, run into the private dining room, jump on, and realize there's absolutely no Wi-Fi. The Wi-Fi was protected. I didn't have login details. I didn't have any reception. It was a disaster, wasn't it?
Yeah, look,
lovely.
it wasn't, it was one of those unexpected challenges that life threw at us to sort of see how we'd handle and
And
cope.
if you watch the YouTube video, you'll see that my background looks different to all
Different
the
in
other
that one.
backgrounds in the other.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But
Anyway,
look,
and then we had all this lag because the Wi-Fi was so bad. Also on his end, wasn't it?
yeah. Well, and with many of our guests
was a
too,
challenge.
that's the challenge of having an online recorded podcast, that you are also working to the conditions of our guests, and sometimes the connection's good, sometimes the audio's good, and sometimes we're like tweaking on the go. So yeah, that is obviously a bit of a challenge, and that was one of them. And I think there was times when we had to reschedule because of illness, like you mentioned, and we weren't sure if the guest was going to jump back on and be really understanding, and thankfully they were. And then there was times when you almost needed to record by yourself because of circumstances on my end, but thankfully it managed to all come together, which was quite amazing in the end, really.
So lucky. Yeah, really amazing. I don't know how we pulled it all off, but we certainly did, and I'm so grateful for it. I mean, literally, I said in the beginning, we only met a couple of months ago, like, I don't know, 3 months ago or something like that. It's incredible that we just committed and just jumped on this wild ride and somehow made it happen. And I'm so proud of us with what we've been able to put together in that short period of time. So cool. I've certainly enjoyed it for the most part, and I'm so grateful for it. So big thank you to you, Kerrin, for just embracing the crazy journey.
No, and thank you also. It has been an amazing journey from the initial conversation, sprouting that idea in our minds, to going, we could actually do this, to working through all the parts of what makes the podcast that we've mentioned here, to now be sitting at this point on the other end of, season 1 going, whew, we've connected with some people that are, people that we've probably only hoped to have been able to meet in our lifetime, people that we've referenced and worked with, or, have cited papers from, have, aspired to have businesses like. We've been very fortunate in this season. So I'm not too sure if you've got any final remarks. I'm happy to do our wrap here, but is there anything else that you think we've missed?
I'm happy.
Yeah.
Not really.
All right.
I think we're pretty good.
Amazing. All right. Well, as we wrap up season 1, we want to just echo that lovely message. As we said before, a big thank you to all our listeners and to our guests as well, and everyone who has supported us from the very start. You've been with us through the bumps and the breakthroughs. Your kind words go such a long way, and we're super excited for what's to come next. Season 2 is in the mix at the moment, and trust us, we've got some pretty big surprises coming your way. But until then, take a deep breath, reflect, and remember, if you're in the midst of starting something new and you're finding it a little bit challenging or things get a little bit hard, that can often be where the magic happens. So thank you heaps for listening. We can't wait to catch you in season 2.